So my name is Robtel, Pailey, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Social Policy. I am the co-chair of this year's departmental seminar series, and my colleague Thomas Biegard will be chairing the winter term series of seminars. And today I'm really pleased to welcome a colleague, a sister, a friend, Kamna Patel from University College London, who is also a member of a group that she and I co-founded in 2020 called the Race and Development Working Group. And it was founded as an opportunity and a platform for scholars, practitioners, as well as policymakers of development to have a safe space where they could talk about how development is fundamentally shaped by processes of race, racialization, and racism. And so we built this presentation, a special Race Matters Initiative departmental seminar, because Kamna is going to be talking about how neoliberal universities effectively market their development studies programs. So I'll give you the spiel in terms of who she is. Kamna Patel is an associate professor of development studies at University College London. And until recently, interestingly enough, she was the principal advisor on anti-racism with the international development NGO Christian Aid. She might or might not talk about that, but I think it's quite intriguing. Her current research and practice explore the relationships between race, understood as a racialized hierarchy of value, and development. This builds on three strands of her research. First, on housing, land tenure, and citizenship in the urban so-called Global South. Number two, on reflexive practice and post-colonial scholarship on the teaching and practice of development, which I think she'll talk a lot about during this presentation. And third, last but certainly not least, the application of a race lens to understanding and taking action for equity and justice. And just as an aside, which is kind of related to Kamna's presentation, but we, as the Race Matters Initiative, will also be organizing a Black History Month presentation and panel on Monday entitled Blackness and the Research Gaze. This is in conjunction with the Department of Methodology. And we'll be talking about what are the ethical conundrums of studying Black subjectivities within the context of scholarship, policy, and practice. So I hope you'll join us for that. That is on Monday the 16th from 6:30 until about 9 o'clock. It'll be followed by a reception. We've got a really dynamic panel, including Kandia from our department. He's going to be on that panel talking about her work on Afro-Colombian cultural heritage policies. So without much ado, I want us to give a warm social policy welcome to Kamna Patel.
Thank you for such a lovely, energizing welcome. I appreciate it, Robtel, and thank you all very much for spending your lunchtime here and listening to what it is that I'm going to be talking about. As Robtel intimated, a lot of this work comes from who I am, I suppose, in many ways as an academic that has been burdened with administration, as I'm sure many folks who become academics are. And so I want to offer a different way to think about these engagements with the stuff we have to do the stuff we want to do, which is often the ways in which it's framed. So as Robtel mentioned, it's a Race Matters initiative, and I'd like to just echo and share, I hope, that it's an initiative that's critically important in and of itself, but also to ensure that conversations that started in earnest back in 2020 don't stall and are not allowed to stall because they're too difficult or we find ourselves too implicated in structures of racism. And so my talk illustrates why thinking about race matters to the manifestations of the Neoliberal University. And like my own institution, I'm sure there are plenty of illustrations around us if we care to look for them about why we might be implicated in neoliberal universities, but also how we too, as students, teachers, administrators, are implicated in structures of racism. So thank you to Robtel for that introduction. One of the administrative duties that I had was that I was a course director for my master's program, teaching development studies. And I was responsible to then encourage would-be students to sign up and to meet our numbers, if that's a familiar phrase to somebody over the summer. So I'd like to begin my presentation with some words of empathy. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the language of marketing in the context of higher education. Communicating, I am much more comfortable with that. So for academics who are engaged in the teaching, research, and practice of development, reflecting on the ways in which we may be implicated in the neoliberal university proved to be a very unsettling experience. So in this presentation, as well as exploring the relationships between marketing, development studies, education, and the Neoliberal University, it offers a prompt for deeper reflections on an aspect of academic work that's rarely examined, and that's the administrative function and service of academics. And it stands in contrast to reflexive accounts of doing research or doing teaching. So the presentation loosely follows a paper that I published last year as part of a special issue that I co-edited on development studies in the Neoliberal University. And what I'm going to do is explore the ways in which development studies courses are packaged and sold to fee-paying students, and demonstrate how university marketing professionals and academic leads of development studies courses are implicated in perpetuating racist assumptions and problematic stereotypes in service to attracting student customers. So in doing so, I aim to elevate views of administrative service from a necessary inconvenience to a point of critical and ethical interjection that affects the values that are appealed to and edified in the core to study development. By scrutinizing the discourses of marketing, I hope to learn something about the intention of universities and their development studies departments. And this allows me to unpack the assumptions and claims made of development education and expose real tensions between the functionality of marketing and thoughtful, critical, scholarly reflections on development as a subject. And so marketing discourse and representations of the subject of marketing, development, are revealing of a neoliberal modality that drives a crucial aspect of all academic work. So I'm drawing on two fields of critical inquiry, critical higher education studies and critical development studies, to argue that the logic of development studies course marketing produces representations that engender a type of cosmopolitan desire among students and project cosmopolitan virtue of the university and its development activities. So within critical development studies, there is a rich body of work that examines selling development and its representations in the marketing campaigns of NGOs, of ethical businesses, things like Tom's Shoes, and that's the sort of thing that I mean. Foreign national policy, major anti-poverty global campaigns, but not actually in development studies education. But the marketing of development studies education is topical in this political climate where the Neoliberal University is a distinct site of the increased marketization and commercialization of UK higher education globally. So this manifests in logics that market the superiority of Western knowledge, that brand UK universities as leading providers of expert knowledge, with the promise of endowing lucrative capitals on prospective students. So the Neoliberal University is a concept that's well established. You don't have to read that all. But this is where I'm taking the idea from and the concept from the work of Stephen Ball. It's a well-established concept in critical higher education scholarship. And broadly speaking, the Neoliberal University is that border crossing between the private sector, state agencies, and international consortia and other nation states. And what it does is it takes these complex relationships and they're built upon contracts rather than collegiality and aimed at profit generation rather than knowledge for its own sake or public service. So in this environment of commercial sensibility, where pre-COVID and a little bit pre-Brexit, when the effects of Brexit took hold, university fees in the UK generated 49% of all university income. So that was in 2019. 17% of that is from international student fees, so a considerable chunk. The importance of marketing and branding the university and its courses to international students particularly, which is an elastic market, is elevated. So I want to present a brief scalar understanding of the marketing of development studies education, from nation branding to university branding and then course level marketing. And read together, these three scales identify multiple points of interjection, as well as illustrate the comprehensiveness of the Neoliberal University that Ball was describing. Within specific approaches to marketing, I'm also going to flag these ideas of cosmopolitanism. So looking at nation branding Britain. So in this competitive and lucrative global higher education marketplace, UK universities, underwritten by the UK government, drive a package of UK higher education as a desirable product. And the British brand is one that's associated with globally recognized quality. So Ravinder Sudhu and others have long argued this type of nation branding formed by Western universities generates and plays on a discourse of the relative superiority of Western education and knowledge. At the scale of nation branding, international development has also played a key role in branding post-colonial Britain. And this is particularly evident at two moments. First, the creation of DFID, and the second, its dismantling. So Howard discussed in the late 1990s that under Tony Blair's Labour government, a new Britain was purposefully reimagined and remade, in which the idea of DFID was encapsulated, and sorry, I should say the Department for International Development, for anyone who doesn't know, encapsulated as a global moral authority of a post-colonial Britain. And in the white paper of 2000, it said a Britain, he describes a Britain reborn free of its imperial past. This is a Britain that's generous, it's a Britain that is gregarious, encoded in its development work. And then following that merger of DFID and the SEDO in 2020, following those public reflections on DFID, is this lamentation of a globally respected and morally upstanding British export. Andrew Mitchell, who was the former Secretary of State for International Development and is now the Minister of State for Development and Africa, and that is his title, Development and Africa, under the SEDO. So he went further in 2020 and said in an ahistoric and decontextualized statement, just as America was a military superpower, Britain was a development superpower, with its tentacles and work spreading all around the world. He said that at a seminar at the University of Birmingham, and it's on YouTube, so you can see it. Drawing these nation branding discourses together, the UK becomes marked as a uniquely desirable destination for the study of development. And this context is relevant in light of international student choice literature, which repeatedly finds a hierarchy of prospective student decision-making that runs from select a desirable country, then a prestigious institution, and then, of course, you're interested in that order. So nation branding sets the context for branding the university. The university brand is a unique competitive identity that captures the values a university wishes to project externally. And those can include, for example, excellence, prestige, being global. And I've implicated my own there, UCL, being a global citizen. Closely related to other university marketing strategies, branding as a verb concerns building associations between a brand, so the university, and consumers of the brand, including prospective students, prospective staff, and research funders. In a competitive marketplace, a successful brand identity defines a university's offer in relation to other universities. So why here and not UCL? The extent to which a brand identity is aspirational or emerges from the institution's actual performance is subject to debate. How excellent are we really? Most usefully, we can regard the university brand as ideological and a means to convey a particular purpose. And this is exemplified by a study that was conducted in the US of higher education institutions there, where Farber and Horn, their study, they write, in a political context where higher education is decried as elitist and removed from popular concerns, and so argue that a university's brand is to project the university as admirable and a worthy public good. So despite internal tensions in formulating an appropriate brand for the university, they say, the public image must elide internal strife and contradictions and convey instead a grand harmony of diverse ends. This means that in communicating to our external audiences, virtuous slogans like meeting the challenges of our world, or in the UK context, that discourse of meeting grand challenges, do not just speak to the merits of a particular university or to particular students, but a response to the desire for the university to be seen as a public good that serves us all. So Farber and Holm's contribution allows us to regard the university brand at two complementary levels. The first is a competitive university image that attracts students, staff, and funders from other universities. And the second is the university is a collaborative space, and it concerns the higher education sector as a public paradigm, an admirable, worthy, and virtuous endeavor, which are cosmopolitan themes that I'm going to come to later. So the third scale is course marketing. Now there's very, very little literature on course marketing as a field of practice, and certainly compared to university marketing and branding. But the two are of course linked, as course marketing is a subset of university branding. Where the brand establishes a particular purpose, courses have to exemplify the brand. So if a university describes itself as excellent, then course marketing has to demonstrate how the university is excellent. And I've noticed here that you have to say what you're an expert in. It's on the website, right? Mm-hmm. So at a course level, and this is typically done with reference to named staff as experts, to QS subject rankings, and the latest outcome of the RAF, emblazoned usually on a departmental website, unless you didn't do very well. Additionally, and discussed in student choice literature, course marketing serves to inform prospective students about course content. And here clarity and accessibility of information on course content and structure are particularly important, alongside exciting prospective students. And it's within this objective to stir excitement and pique interest in a course that representations of development and development studies courses become quite pertinent. So identify three frames to understand how imaginations of development are sold within the development industry. And I place universities firmly within an industry that I'll come back to in light of the data in my study. The first frame is marketing development as a positive association for the consumer. So the prominence of this frame has increased since the 1990s as a notable, though partial, shift away from so-called poverty porn images of development, which were typified by NGO fundraising campaigns around the famine in Ethiopia in the 80s, where consumers were made to feel unease and discomfort at the drive for action. Instead, development marketing has turned its focus to the northern self from a southern other. Where the latter is a distant imagination, the former represents a highly individualized, immediate, and action-orientated response to a faraway development crisis such as famine or ecological disaster or the effects of conflict. The northern self is made sophisticated, affluent, cosmopolitan, and sexy through their generosity as individual donors, supporters, and consumers of a worthy cause. Actions that do not recognize development crises in structures of inequality or historicize them in largely European practices of colonialism and slavery. So the folks that have the article Making Development Sexy, Cameron and Hansra, they suggest that the construction of the northern self as good, well-intentioned and cosmopolitan does not mark any significant change in representations of development or of the global south. North-south dualism still exists intact, othering still takes place, and partial accounts of development favorable to northern audiences are still generated. Instead, what they observe is a reversal in what is made implicit and what is made explicit. For example, a focus on southern want and need, as found in campaigns of the past, implicitly creates a north that is full and should therefore be balanced. In making development sexy and constructing a northern cosmopolitan benefactor, the northern self is made explicit and makes implicit the southern recipient parochialism. So that second frame is marketing development as a commodity, specifically an ethical purchase. And this is where Lisa Ann Ritchie's work around brand aid becomes quite relevant if you're familiar with that. She uses the term brand aid to refer to the phenomenon of branding development problems and the people they affect in consumable products that are then sold to northern audiences, such as wristbands, ribbons, t-shirts, and red noses. Within this frame, development is conceptualized as a tradable object or an idea with unique selling points worthy of a worthy cause. I do not suggest university degrees are fungible with t-shirts, but I am identifying, we hope not, are identifying course-related marketing as a particular approach to marketing that comes from business studies in which private sector companies associate their products with a moral good. And within this marketing logic, what is being sold is a moral good, where the product itself is incidental. For the consumer, the purchase of the moral good is the noteworthy moral action. What do people do with those red noses after they bought them? Not much, I'm guessing. In the marketing of development studies courses, we may recognize that logic within the calls to study development. The third frame for marketing development as a representation is as a mark of global citizenship and as a means to make global citizens. So the concept of global citizenship in the context of development is described by Oxfam as active engagement with the world and helping to make it a just and sustainable place. In scholarly work from education studies, examining global citizenship education in UK schools, Martin and Griffith argue teachers prepare their pupils to play an active role as citizens based on the liberal concept of care. And they explain that this means the notion of aid, responsibility, and poverty alleviation retain the other as an object of benevolence, but the global citizen is somehow naturally endowed with the ability and the inclination to help the other as an act of global citizenship. So to be addressed as a global citizen is to be marked as benevolent. Global citizenship education is thus marked by geopolitics of knowledge production that privilege Euro-American ways of knowing the world. Now, although these authors focus on secondary education, there are connections to higher education, and the packaging of development studies courses is crafting a type of global citizenship where global citizens, i.e. national and highly mobile international students, are sold the capacity and self-belief to intervene and to bring about change in societies to which they may or may not belong, based loosely on an individual sense of responsibility to and for the other. So marketing development studies courses as a purchasable ethical product that engenders positive associations with student customers and represents an act of global citizenship on their part serve as frames to recognize marketing logics in the representations of development in course marketing materials. And across all three frames is also the creation of these cosmopolitan identities. Here's my next slide. I'll go on to that now. So being cosmopolitan is then this global identity. It invokes this global identity and a vision of a beautiful idea of a borderless human condition. The beautiful idea coming from Robtel. It is a rich field of scholarship. So my engagement with it is very narrow, necessarily narrow. In higher education scholarship, cosmopolitanism is often interpreted through this internationalization agenda, typified by global citizenship education and international student mobility. The geography of this cosmopolitanism in literature is marked by northern and southern difference and flows. Students from the global south flow to the north, and northern education courses fund southern study and exploration within the context of development. So the ubiquitous field trip, for example. Where cosmopolitanism is critiqued, it can be banal and focus on its unrealized promise in education. Yet the concept itself reflects an intrinsic epistemic and moral position inseparable from colonial and imperial structures of power, of which UK universities with outward-looking internationalization agenda, like setting up branch campuses around the world, are one manifestation. In Magnolo's persuasive account of the reinvigoration of the concept of cosmopolitanism to the 21st century, he suggests its Kantian origins in driving a project of European global expansion have not been undone and rethought in education scholarship. Highly individualized discourses of rights and a liberal concept of citizenship underpinning civilizing missions from the north emanate outwards onto the world. So in this study, cosmopolitan desire, wanting to be a certain kind of person or wanting to be seen as a certain kind of institution, I argue, is reflected in and engendered by the marketing discourses of development studies education, both at the scale of the course and at the institution. And this is not to dismiss or minimize this beautiful idea of cosmopolitanism, but identify it as a problematic outcome of particular marketing discourses. So in the work that I did and in the paper that was out last year, I focus on two UK universities, University A and University B, very imaginatively. They share common characteristics that affect the apparatus of university marketing. So they're both large research-intensive institutions with a considerable number and range of postgraduate courses. They command high fees from national and international postgraduate students. And I focus on postgraduate because that's where mostly you find development studies courses. Both universities are competitively and uniquely placed in their field, and so do not have to engage in the aggressive marketing that's often ascribed to so-called mass market universities. And maybe you can read between the lines as to what universities get to be called mass market and which ones are prestigious and don't have to engage in that. They don't have to try very hard to attract students, is what I mean. So I did a discourse analysis. There were a number of public documents, including course brochures and web pages, interviewed university marketing professionals, and more interestingly for me, I think, academic leads of development studies courses. I also ran some focus groups for development studies students at the beginning of their course. So they hadn't yet done all the critical stuff that they've got to do. So it's right at the beginning. And I was looking at two scales of marketing, or branding and development, the university, how the university is branded through its development activities, and development studies course marketing. So looking at development and the university brand, so when nation branding discourses construct the UK as a desirable destination for the study of development, the university brand builds these positive associations between the university and brand consumers, including prospective students. So the brand of the two large universities in this study is necessarily broad and transdisciplinary. And I'm only looking at development studies here as a way to signify aspects of the university brand, and that's namely their global outreach, outlook, impact, and public purpose. So I didn't set out to look at the university brand, but in the course of navigating to and from departmental web pages and through interviews with marketing professionals and student groups, it became apparent that the university brand was a major draw for all of the students, and specific aspects of the brand they valued most was its global outlook and its global associations. So one student picked up explicitly on the colonial ties that underlie the international reputation of UK universities, remarking, "A UK degree from here mattered a lot to me because of where I want to work after I move back to Hong Kong. And university here is quite highly regarded in the UK. Obviously, it's a former British colony." Other international students added that they chose the university because it is very prestigious. I knew coming to this city would mean an international environment. So again, consistent with international student choice literature, for highly mobile English-speaking students, there's a keenness to build an association with universities with reputations for international prestige and an international environment, coded in very specific geographies. So for materials that I reviewed for this study, there are three elements of an international agenda and development were evident: global reach, global impact, and public purpose. So alongside the offer of development studies courses, both universities illustrated the doing of development on their own central web pages through named research projects and the offer of development consultancy work. So these became practical demonstrations of how development is demonstrative of the global agenda of the university. And the focus on the application of development profiles by the university was evidence of its reach from the north into the south. The doing of development work by the university was presented without critique or reflection, without reference to debates within development scholarship that might mark a particular project as noteworthy in its fields. That is, representations of development in research and practice were decontextualized, and the presentation of applied development was framed within an overarching discourse of impact. We have impact because we do development work. This discourse needs to be understood within the context of the UK ref, and a particular meaning around the actions of hero academics causing a positive effect elsewhere. The representations of these development endeavours also mark the institution as admirable and a virtuous global player that's meeting our global grand challenges. The third element of that public purpose draws together global reach and impact to build a compelling case for why the work of the university in spaces of development matters. So at University B, international development specifically, was listed as part of the institution's strategic mission, alongside widening participation and access initiatives. So specific mention was made of development studies, long and short courses offered by the university, and these were described as forming part of the university's long-standing commitment to social justice. The intertwining of development education and university admissions into a common and holistic view of justice crafts the central role for imaginations of development at the heart of a public university's public purpose and signifies higher education as public paradigm. So representations and implicit images of development create a sense of cosmopolitanism that serves the university's brand. That is, the university itself is illustrated and made global, worldly, and a concerned international actor through its development work, and thereby is branded as admirable, worthy, and virtuous. Now, these become key selling points for prospective students that create that kind of an association. So looking at that third scale of marketing development studies courses, I'm going to say where I got these images from in a moment. Representations of development in course marketing are much more explicit and intentional in guiding prospective students to enroll. So unpacking representations of development across course brochures and web pages reveals a common set of conceptualizations of development across these two universities. Every single one of these images I took from an open source Shuttercock, I think it was, a Creative Commons license. They are typical, they are not the exact image. And that's just so I can preserve the anonymity of the institutions where I was. But I hope you might find them familiar of the kinds of development images that you'd see. So in imagery, both university departments mimic these familiar tropes of development, specifically highly racialized tropes of desperate or lacking Black and brown bodies, and either barren, you can see it here, barren or chaotic landscapes that are designed to appear unfamiliar to the viewer. All of the images viewed are entirely suggestive of the so-called global south, without ever being specific as to geographic places, social contexts, nations, or cultures. Nothing is actually named. The absence of any captioning suggests it doesn't matter of what or where the images were taken. The otherness in the image is the central selling point and is connoted in the occasional Black or brown body or type of architecture, such as a tin roof. It's also unclear if the images are one of sustainable development or its absence. The lack of any other context to the images leads the viewer to imagine that this is pre or an ongoing development and not the end product. And largely because of the Africa-esque landscape of barrenness or South Asian landscape of crowded chaos, it becomes a familiar trope of places needing development. It's a trope that resonates with the viewer. And the constant depiction of pre-development or places in need of development thus consistently frames the scene as lacking input or intervention, presumably from the would-be viewer or reader of the image, that is the would-be doer of development, our potential students. And of course, multi-modality matters for viewer comprehension and interpretation of these images, yet in both cases, all of the images are abstract and decontextualized from the surrounding text. So the surrounding text would be a description of the course, the learning objectives, when term dates start, nothing that's actually related to the images. Owing to the absence of any explanatory text, in particular in images in which a problem is in need of solving is connoted, the gaze is clearly that of an outsider viewer, bringing particular judgments of where and what the problem is. So issues of agency and gaze are amplified in the text, in brochures and web pages, which always spoke directly to a prospective student audience. In the text, there's a strong emphasis that we need to take action and personal appeals to make a difference, and the identification of development as a field of practice and with the course as a means to acquire practical skills in this area. For example, University A states, this course provides analytical and practical tools to engage reflexively with challenges in the global south. This call to action is supported by the structure of both departmental web pages, which use pop-ups and sidebars to guide viewers to register their details for open days or brochures, moving a step closer to application and the acquisition of these very practical skills. So in interviews with university marketing professionals and the academic leads of development studies courses, we derive explanations on how these particular textual and visual representations are arrived at. And it's interesting to note here that the almost opposing priorities and motivations between academic leads and university marketing professionals, in a context where development studies courses in this study did not have to market themselves aggressively to attract students to the course. So because that really does condition the academics that I interviewed. So for university marketing professionals, their primary motivation was demonstrating value for money. And it's a key word in creating marketing content and attracting a high number of quality students. So this included details of student facilities alongside the quality of marketing paraphernalia. One marketing professional stated, if something doesn't look polished, it doesn't look like you've put enough time and effort into it, things like paper quality in terms of student recruitment marketing. If you're asking me to pay you £9,000, you're going to have to wow me at every point. And this is them imagining what students are thinking and so how they act. And these elements are demonstrative of value for money, creates an association for the student customer that speaks very clearly to the university brand. Specific marketing materials represents a quality brand that builds and complements brand recognition amongst potential students. And this person that I interviewed, when they talk about the quality and the thickness of the paper, they went into quite some detail about the brand of the paper that signified quality to students and not even the recycled stuff, where you can see bits of former paper in it. So the university brand is present in all course marketing visually in terms of the logo, the color schemes, the font and the tone, and structurally through web page templates and specific host servers. So the structural ways in which course marketing happens and is directed is not noted by academic leads involved in course marketing. Overall, academic leads do not have to think too much about growing student numbers, and so are driven to regard course brochures and web page content as vehicles to convey their particular ideas about the course and the pedagogical approach. The images were somewhat hastily supplied, and the product of very amateur efforts was sourced from a generic image bank. So someone goes for their research, takes a picture, hands it to the marketing person who says, have you got a picture I can put on my web page? And so we end up with stuff like this. They're not images commissioned by professional photographers with a carefully considered brief. They are intended only to capture in a decontextualized way ongoing work in the department. So one academic said, sometimes I feel a little bit guilty that we're not really taking this marketing stuff seriously. The content page of my own page, I have not renewed it in years. Maybe I should refresh it, they ask. It makes sense to, because actually course content is one of the things that we really love and are passionate about, but there's a lack of time and interest. Seriously, marketing is the least of my concerns. And I think we're lucky that we're so well known, we don't actually have to do this thing. Another on reflection lamented the distance between university marketing teams and academics, noting, I'm not a marketing person. I have no expertise whatsoever, and the same goes for my colleagues. We are not marketing people. I do believe there's the discipline of it, and I'm not trained in it. So I'd like a closer relationship, but we get dribs and drabs, but nothing that sort of formally ties academic understanding to the marketing discipline. So despite the arm's length that academics felt they kept from course marketing, they're still very much part of the marketing machinery. They fit into a carefully curated slot of branded activities in everyday ways that articulate the university brand. So this is the branding of people as experts and expertise that is heavily relied upon to attract students and largely dependent on projecting academic profiles and the production of exciting course marketing content on practical skills, expert creating learning outcomes and training in innovative approaches to development that pique that interest from students and fulfill value for money expectations. So noting the tension that can exist between academics and the discourse of marketing, a marketing professional noted, I get that people are uncomfortable with the title marketing, and brand can cause issues too. Sometimes we might reframe things and use words like reputation, which is not the same as brand, but it's an element of brand. And what this person's reflecting on is the sensitivity that they have to adopt when working with academics who don't like the word marketing and don't like to think they're involved in marketing in any way. That level of sensitivity is not mirrored by academic leads who approach the engagement with course marketing and just decry it as uncritical and unthoughtful and lacking in reflexivity. The overarching effect, however, is the creation of non-critical representations of development in imagery and text. The absence of meaningful engagement with the content of course marketing also subverts established student marketing logic. So one university marketing professional commented on the imagery in course marketing that you want students to be able to see themselves here, studying here. And you do that by representing in the images. And you see that any course brochure you pick up, there'll be a grassy knoll and there'll be 3 students of different ethnicities sitting laughing over a book, right? So you can picture yourself there. But in things like this, where is the student? There were no images of students in development course marketing, only development Cs, encouraging students to imagine themselves only in relation to other development subjects. So in the artifacts that I looked at, the Global South is shown and described as a real place and not an abstract methodological or theoretical provocation. In its denotation as a real place, it is shown as chaotic, disorganized, untidy, busy, and aesthetically displeasing. The viewer's gaze is meant to contrast with the world they inhabit. And these are not images of poor people for poor people, but are images designed to appeal to prospective students and stoke their imagination. Not necessarily intentionally, the 2 development courses have built this cognitive association for prospective students to the values of development as a normative pursuit, geographically grounded in the Global South and predicated on helping others who are not like us. Current development students were overwhelmingly critical of the representations of development in course marketing materials. And of the images in the course brochures and on development web pages, typical reflections included, I don't know her name and I am looking at her. We are all looking at her, the person in the image. I felt like I was objectifying someone or something she was representing. I think that is when I saw the woman and the fact that this woman was associated with this page and had the big word development, I did not love it. Another said, I do take an issue with these images of informality, and if it is sort of framed in a way of helplessness, and it is kind of like, I don't feel comfortable with that. Another, this just felt dated. This is not what I signed up for. Final student, it's like a caricature in some way. I'm sorry, I am halfway offended that the university would portray this picture of their own course. So all of those image-based representations of development were disappointing to the students, provoking a visceral reaction and a strong sense of discomfort. And this was acute amongst white students from broadly the global north. One noted, obviously, I have to be very critical about development discourse being from the West and everything. It puts you in a very difficult position to work in that field as a constant self-questioning, if you're allowed. But the images were also familiar, legible signifiers of development tropes that spoke to students in a common register. One said, it felt stereotypical to me, honestly. It was like, and it sounds terrible, but that is the kind of image you'd expect in an aid agency or in an international humanitarian agency. They push that kind of image in the industry. It's not necessarily bad, it's just what you would expect. Another added, I think it ties to images that you're so used to seeing, these images of development, and think to some degree, you kind of get desensitized by it because you see it so much. The students of development, the representations of development they encountered did not need to be explained. Their prior expectations and knowledge of the discipline forged in the context of these stereotypical deficit-loaded racialized tropes were recognized and recognizable. Their meaning was understood. So while students did not want to see these images, what they represented remained appealing, alongside the intuitive relationship between imagery and text. All the students said they focused on the skills and employability they can expect from the course and its value for money. The language of practical skills executed in the Global South that is evident in course marketing materials was supplemented by their own research and convinced these students to enroll. Now, by further research for most of these students, it meant using social media to see different, more appealing images of development and development work. And Instagram was mentioned several times as an important source of information to convey how fellow students saw their course, especially the overseas elements to it. So one Instagram viewing students shared, and it's written exactly how they said it, right? So you can imagine. And then I even went like super nerd and like watched everyone's videos from last year. And I was like, how cool, National Geographic. So I thought it was really, really me. I started to envision a really exotic life for myself, like becoming a filmmaker midway through the course. This is a joke. But in seriousness, I really liked what I saw. Now, what is made exotic in this encounter is not development work per se, but the representations of it in a fascinating, attractive, and perhaps enviable way. Overall, there was a preference for images and texts that are hopeful and representative of empowered development subjects, though an important caveat is from two non-white students, broadly from not in the north, from the south, who said they felt the images were real and that it should be discomforting to see the realities of living a life in poverty. One remarked, "I do not feel bad for them, the people in the photos. I see structures of inequality, and I see people who are dealing with really difficult things and making the best of it." The points of departure on problematic representations of development and the feelings they engender appear, or are starting to appear, between broadly acceptance of discomfort amongst Southern non-white students and an abject rejection amongst a group where the most vocal opponents are Northern and white. The desires engendered by representations of development is captured by this concept of cosmopolitanism, particularly a Northern cosmopolitanism as used by Cameron and Hensra, which is that development made sexy piece that I mentioned earlier. The cosmopolitan desire is wanting to be seen as outward-looking, global, and a compassionate agent of change. And it remained present in all student reflections of course marketing materials, with the driver in their decision to enroll. A Northern cosmopolitanism in development marks the construction of a Northern self that is made good and benevolent, free of the feelings of discomfort embedded in typical development scenes of the other. The visceral reaction of these students to images of development and the strong desire for more hopeful imagery at some level relates to personal appeals as the action-orientated text. It's suggestive of a Northern cosmopolitan desire of wanting to engage in a socially valuable endeavor, but without being made to feel uncomfortable about it. To the end. Oh, I haven't finished yet. I think I read that. So coming towards the end. In the marketing of development studies education, cosmopolitan desire, so wanting to be a kind of person or wanting to be seen as a certain kind of institution, is reflected in and engendered by marketing discourses at the scale of the university and of the course. The branding of cosmopolitanism is sensitive to national political debates and the value, at least notionally, of public institutions to the public at large. Within a national context that marks the UK as a desirable destination for the study of development, university branding draws upon representations of development to project global reach, impact, and public purpose through its development activities. At the course level, tired visual representations of development that draw upon well-established but racist tropes of development needing people and places are apparent in course content, marketing content, and may well persist through blurred lines of responsibility between university marketing teams and academic leads. Interestingly, these tropes are identified as such and rejected by students of development, with those preferring more positive and hopeful representations, notable by their global positioning. In this, I argue the concept of Northern cosmopolitanism is a useful one to describe the desire to help and be a global citizen through a marketing focus on the doers of development and not the neediness of development subjects. The notion of cosmopolitanism engendered by representations of development in the marketing and branding of universities is not delinked from its Kantian origins in European global expansion. Rather, it perpetuates cosmopolitan geographies of Northern and Southern difference and flow. Cosmopolitanism as a concept and its relationship to branding and development remains rooted in Europe and its institutions, looking out to elsewhere and marking themselves as worldly. Its articulations are embedded in highly mobile international students, courted to study development in the UK, at prestigious institutions with global impact, in specific courses that speak to their pre-existing imagination of what development is. The content of marketing and branding where these focus on development representations are epistemic and moral positions that are inseparable from colonial structures of power and echo a wider context of nation branding the UK and the study and practice of international development. I hope, what I hope in sharing this work with you today, is that my work raises sufficient cause for deep and meaningful engagement with the role of development academics and the roles that we play, particularly in practices of course marketing and the production of critical and reflexive representations of development that challenge and remake imaginations of the discipline. This element of rethinking development education has the potential, I believe, to constructively rework the values that are appealed to and edified in the call to study development.